Hey guys, tonight we delve into the hush of the Mongol encampment under a silver moon, where even the shadows seem to whisper secrets across endless grasslands. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Later, drop a comment telling me which city you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A cool breeze drifts across rows of low felt dwellings pitched in concentric rings around a shallow watercourse. Embers from yesterday's fires smolder beneath heavy iron grates, and faint tendrils of smoke curl into the moonlit sky. Colonial histories tell us that by 1206 Temujin had united fractious Mongol tribes under the Yasa, a code of laws that bound clans with loyalty and fear. But here, in the stillness of night, you witness something more immediate. Wild-eyed couriers bracing against the wind, while tribal elders murmur prayers in ancient Turkic dialects, sparking curiosity about how oral traditions shaped imperial governance. Stars shimmer overhead like pinholes in a great curtain, inviting scouts to navigate by constellations rather than crude maps. One mainstream fact holds that Mongol horsemen covered up to 200 miles per day using a relay system that reshaped communication across Eurasia. Yet an obscure technique, often overlooked, involved spreading crushed goat fat on leather saddles to prevent frostbite and minimize noise. A pragmatic hack born of bitter winters. Historians are still debating how widespread this practice became before the 13th century, indicating that small customs can ignite major academic controversies. Lanterns carved from polished animal horn cast pools of yellow light on woven rugs inside the largest tent, where scribes sit cross-legged, recording midnight commands in gallnut ink. Primary sources like The Secret History of the Mongols described these transcripts with reverence, yet they omit the sly grin that sometimes flickered across the Khan's face when ordering particularly audacious maneuvers. Some scholars argue that these anecdotes were later embellishments, while others insist they reveal a multifaceted leader balancing ruthlessness and humor, a debate that lingers in academic circles. A hush falls as Genghis Khan emerges atop a low wooden platform, his silhouette outlined by the moonlight filtering through the yurt's crown. His fur-trimmed coat ripples in the breeze, and his eyes gleam with quiet intensity. One mainstream observation notes that his presence alone could silence 1,000 voices. Yet an obscure story preserved in a solitary Persian travelogue mentions that he sometimes lit his own lantern to read personal letters before issuing public decrees. Historians are still debating whether this gesture symbolized humility or served as psychological theater to earn loyalty. Smoke curls from half-smothered hearths as warriors wrap themselves in heavy wool cloaks dyed with natural pigments from crushed berries. Primary anthropological research confirms that blue dyes derived from indigo were rare along the steppe until Mongol campaigns brought in merchants from Central Asia. Yet chemical analysis of textiles recovered near Karkaran suggests experimental use of lapis lazuli powder, a nugget of color both practical and symbolic, subject to debate among textile historians. Squads of hand-picked riders move like shadows among the yurts, their horses stepping silently on dew-drenched grass beneath midnight moons. A lesser-known fact details how scouts sometimes left tiny cairns of stones painted with chalk to mark hidden trails, a rudimentary signage system that some experts argue was borrowed from Uzbek guides, while others insist it sprang from Mongol innovation. The question of origin fuels spirited discussion at conferences on ancient wayfinding. Tapestries depicting grand hunts hang from wooden poles, catching flickers of torchlight. They are embroidered in rich saffron and indigo threads, blending folklore and fact. Two riders flank a charging boar while falconers loom in the background. Scholars cite these images as proof of integrated artistic traditions spanning Mongolia and Persia. Yet debate persists over whether such weavings were commissioned by the Khan himself or produced by subjected artisans obliged to serve his court. A distant drumbeat rumbles across rolling hills, its cadence pulsing beneath the silver heart of the camp. According to conventional accounts, drums served as early warning systems, driving warriors to arms. But some historians contest how far the sound truly carried. Others propose that signature rhythms varied regionally, a theory bolstered by field studies of acoustics in wide grasslands. A topic still under robust scholarly debate. Leather scroll cases bound with rawhide cords lie ready for dispatch beside sealed quivers of arrows, sharpened by portable whetstones. One mainstream military insight highlights the logistical genius required to maintain arrow production on the move. Yet excavation of ancient relay posts uncovered high concentrations of iron filings, suggesting portable forges traveled with the army. An archaeological find that has experts debating how far forward smiths could safely operate under enemy observation. A solemn assembly of tribal chiefs gathers on embroidered carpets, carrying symbolic gifts of finely cured horse meat and fermented mare's milk served in goatskin flasks. Ethnographers unearthed pollen grains in charred remains of ceremonial bowls, hinting at the use of local herbs for flavor, but they continue to argue whether such rituals were standardized under the Yasa or varied clan by clan, illustrating contested views on religious uniformity. Lanternlight flickers on a polished tamga seal pressed into warmed wax, sealing orders so precise rivals dared not tamper with dispatches. Oral tradition remembers these seals as impenetrable, yet archival researchers have uncovered possible forgeries carved from bone, prompting questions about authentication protocols in the empire's farthest reaches. A mystery still unresolved by contemporary scholarship. A squad of scouts slips from the gathering, forming silent columns that navigate hidden paths charted by leather-bound maps sealed for officers' eyes only. Mainstream cartographic analysis credits these maps with guiding armies across unforgiving terrain, yet specialists debate whether Mongol route charts qualify as topographical maps or function solely as sequential itineraries, reflecting evolving definitions of medieval mapping. Within the hush of dawn's edge, faint glimmers show riders tightening girths on their mounts, each horse bred for endurance, able to outrun predators and carry heavy scroll cases strapped to flanks. Archaeozoological studies reveal bone changes in ancient steed remains suggesting chronic strain, yet they fuel disagreement over whether such injuries reflect overuse or post-mortem distortion. A question probing the ethics of equine labor in nomadic societies. Hearth embers glow red beneath an overturned shield where a lone warrior traces letters in soot, clarifying orders before mounting his horse. A fragment of the secret history hints that the Khan personally reviewed each dispatch to ensure no mistake, though some scholars argue this anecdote was later propaganda to magnify his aura of infallibility, reflecting ongoing debate over the reliability of medieval sources. Silvered grass waves with the final pulse of the drum, signaling couriers to mount in unison. Hooves strike sparks from flinty ground, sounding like distant thunder, as riders vanish into darkness bearing words that will shape history before the world even awakens. An obscure footnote preserved in a Yuan dynasty ledger mentions riders whispering prayers to ancestral spirits for safe passage, a practice whose prevalence remains under scrutiny by academic anthropologists. Distant crests blush with dawn's first light, revealing a landscape primed for transformation beneath these midnight orders. Warriors stand in silent columns, their faces set as though carved from stone, a testament to discipline and faith in the Khan's vision. Conventional studies praise this readiness, while critics note that coercion and fear played roles in sustaining such cohesion, raising questions about the interplay of loyalty and coercion under Mongol rule. Final gusts of wind rattle tent flaps as the camp returns to hushed anticipation, awaiting the day's battles. Under the silver moon, the stage was set and the script inked, destined to reshape borders and lives in every direction. Each rider carries a fragment of power and promise, a nocturnal legacy bound in ink and oath under a moonlit sky that witnessed the birth of an empire. Midnight air vibrates with muted anticipation as hoofbeats echo across the dark plain. Faint silhouettes of riders emerge from the cluster of yurts carrying sealed scrolls bound in oilcloth. These messengers form the backbone of the Yam relay system, a network of way stations spaced roughly 30 miles apart that allowed Genghis Khan's commands to traverse up to 200 miles in a single day. Historians still debate whether the average daily distance reached 200 or closer to 150 miles under optimal conditions. Clouds drift across a moonlit sky, while riders adjust leather saddles treated with a thin layer of goat fat to repel cold and moisture. This peculiar custom kept the tack supple during bitter nights and reduced chafing on both horse and rider. Archaeological studies at sites along ancient Mongol routes uncovered traces of animal fat in saddle crevices, confirming the widespread use of this endurance trick. Slowly the messengers gather at a low fire whose embers glow red against the black canvas of night. Each courier carries a tamga seal stamped in molten wax on his scrolls. This symbol denoted authenticity and prevented forged orders from destabilizing the steppe's fragile alliances. Records from Persian observers praise the tamga's deterrent effect, yet some scholars contest how rigorously seals were checked at distant posts. Stealthy figures slip across tall grasses toward the first relay station set 10 miles east. Lanterns carved from horn hang from low branches to mark the way but are extinguished as riders approach to avoid revealing their numbers. Intelligence gathered from these shadowy stopovers ensured that reinforcements and fresh mounts awaited every courier. A lesser-known detail describes how scouts sometimes left small rock cairns as directional markers, a practice historians are still debating for its origin. Gentle wind stirs the uncurling scrolls as the first rider dismounts at the relay yurt. A new horse is led forward while the parchment is read aloud by a station master. Common chronicles emphasize the system's speed, but they rarely mention that each relay stop included a brief rest to check bearings and tend to minor wounds. Anthropologists uncovered herbal salves in relay caches indicating that couriers carried basic medical kits to treat abrasions and muscle strains. Dim lamplight flickers on the faces of station masters who memorize the contents before dispatching the next messenger. Their authority allowed them to judge when orders required immediate departure and when delays served greater strategy. Folk legends credit some masters with carrying secret antidotes for poison hidden within their robes, but credible evidence for this claim remains elusive and widely disputed by experts. Far to the north, the second rider gallops across frozen patches of grasslands shimmering with dew. Horses bred from Mongol stock could run for days without significant rest, forging a reputation for unrivaled endurance. Yet digs near the Orkhon Valley revealed signs of bone stress in equine remains, suggesting that many animals suffered chronic injuries from relentless pacing. That human and animal resilience intertwined to sustain the empire still inspires heated discussion among historians. Echoes of distant wolves accompany the messenger as he navigates gully and ridge by memory. Riders often relied on star positions rather than maps, and more than one courier carried a small astrolabe fashioned from bronze wire to verify bearings. Surviving fragments of such devices were found near sites once marked on Mongol itineraries, though debate persists about whether they served ceremonial or practical purposes. Clumps of wildflower tufts brush against the flanks of a sleek bay horse bred for speed rather than load carrying. Tales linger of riders consuming fermented mare's milk, known as kumis, to stave off fatigue during prolonged journeys. Modern chemical analysis of pottery shards from relay posts confirmed traces of lactic acid, implying that kumis was indeed part of a messenger's ration. Soft thuds announced the arrival of the third horse at another relay post where a gathering of tribal scouts hovers in the shadows. Their whispers blend tribal dialects and Mongolian, reinforcing the multilingual nature of the empire's communication channels. Linguists note that the integration of Turkic, Uyghur, and Mongol terms in official dispatches reflects a pragmatic syncretism still under scholarly debate. Thick leather gloves wrapped in cloth protect the hands of couriers from frostbite when temperatures plunge around dawn. Many messengers wore fingerless mittens to maintain dexterity while handling reins and scrolls. Evidence from textile fragments suggests that these knitted accessories varied regionally, an odd detail often skipped in grand narratives of conquest but essential for surviving the steppe nights. Final leg of the relay begins as dawn's faint glow bleeds across the horizon. A fresh horse snorts in greeting while the last courier prepares to carry the Khan's edict to commanders awaiting orders. Mainstream sources celebrate the unity these messengers fostered across vast distances, but some scholars argue the system's efficiency relied more on fear of reprisal than genuine A swirl of smoke drifts through the entrance of a grand yurt where chiefs from competing tribes have gathered under low lantern light. Each leader drapes himself in a distinctive cloak, some woven with wolf fur, others embroidered with elk hair, announcing identity before a word is spoken. Traditions hold that these garments signaled rank and lineage, a mainstream fact scholars cite when mapping Mongol social hierarchies. Within this steamy chamber, you sense the weight of unspoken promises that will bind these men to Temujin's expanding realm. Soft murmurings rise as a tall chief unfurls a roll of hide stamped with the golden tamga of the Borjigin. This personal seal affirms the Khan's intention to include allied clans under his authority. Handshakes follow firm, deliberate grips on gauntlet hands, symbolizing eternal loyalty. An obscure custom survives in only a few oral histories. Newly allied leaders once exchanged filaments of horsehair dipped in kumis, pledging unity through the mingled strands of hair and fermented mare's milk. Historians are still debating the origin of this ritual, with some asserting Turkic roots and others pointing to Siberian shamanic ceremonies. Glowing coals in a central brazier cast dancing shadows on tapestries depicting hunts and battles. Amid the soft crackle you overhear fragments of dialogue in Mongol, Kipchak, and Uyghur, an everyday multilingualism that enabled rapid consensus across diverse tribes. Linguistic experts note that the empire's administrative efficiency hinged on such polyglot gatherings. Yet they continue to debate how fluently orders were translated without loss of nuance or intent. A stout envoy approaches bearing a wooden bowl filled with roasted goat meat scented by wild thyme. Passing this offering around the circle signifies shared sustenance and reciprocal trust. Archaeobotanical studies of refuse pits near old encampments uncovered thyme pollen, corroborating these dietary details often glossed over in broader histories. You catch yourself imagining the rich flavor and cooperative intent that hummed beneath each tender morsel. Candlelight flickers on the carved features of a Uyghur scribe who records every syllable on oak slats coated in beeswax. The use of reusable writing tablets highlights an eco-savvy practice rarely mentioned in epic narratives. Modern researchers remain divided on whether these wax tablets were the primary medium for all treaties or reserved for preliminary drafts, with final versions inked on silk scrolls, a topic still under scholarly contention. Heavy wooden poles support the high cone of the yurt, from which hang talismans fashioned by shamans. These bone and leather charms, etched with runic symbols, were believed to protect the gathering from curses and misfortune. While folk accounts celebrate their potency, rigorous historians question how widespread and influential these amulets truly were, citing a lack of consistent archaeological evidence across Mongol domains. A hush falls as an elder stands to recite the Yasa, the Khan's codified oral law. You feel the gravity in every clause. Theft punished by blood price, adultery by exile, loyalty rewarded with land and spoils. Debates rage in the academic world over how binding the Yasa was across distant clans. Some argue it was rigidly enforced, others that its vagueness allowed local interpretations and occasional abuses. Threads of silk ribbon are tied to the wrists of each chief, marking the sanctity of their pledge. These ribbons, dyed in lapis lazuli blue, symbolized the eternal sky and the Khan's divine mandate. Chemical analysis of textile fragments found in Karakoram suggests synthetic dyes weren't used until decades later, meaning these early dyes were mineral-based, a subtle fact that challenges previous assumptions about medieval dyeing techniques. An emissary produces a curved bowl of fumigating herbs, wormwood, juniper, and ground iris root to cleanse the yurt of ill omen. The practice of purification rites before signing alliances is well documented among nomadic cultures, yet questions persist about which particular blends were favored by the Mongols. Some historians credit Tibetan Buddhist influence, while others see a more ancient shamanistic lineage, a debate that colors interpretations of cultural syncretism. Low benches of carved elm support cups of fermented mare's milk offered to every participant. A hush follows the first communal sip, sealing the pact through shared intoxication. Ethnographers have noted that the slight inebriation eased tensions and fostered goodwill, though critics argue that emphasizing this detail overshadows more substantive political bargaining. A final gesture seals the accord when the Khan's envoy breaks a single arrow shaft in two and hands half to each allied leader. Breaking and sharing the shaft represented unity and mutual defense. Archaeological digs once uncovered arrow fragments at former yurt sites, but whether they were ceremonial or battle-worn remains a point of contention among experts. Footsteps approach as a chamberlain distributes small iron rings stamped with the Khan's tamga, wearable tokens that confirmed the bearer's new status in the Mongol coalition. While mass distribution of such tokens is mentioned in Persian sources, scholars are still debating how far into the western steppes these rings actually reached, suggesting administrative reach may have varied regionally. Gentle sighs accompany the final words of agreement echoed by the scribe. A woven mat is rolled up, and the leather scrolls are sealed with wax again. Chiefs depart one by one, each clutching a string of beads purported to ward off betrayal. Modern bead analysis shows many were crafted from carnelian, sourced thousands of miles away, a testament to early Mongol trade networks, though the scale of such commerce before the empire's under a velvet sky, the low boom of a single drum reverberates across the camp, stirring echoes of ancient ceremonies. Flickering lamplight dances on leather tents as riders pause mid-preparation to listen for the next pulse. Mainstream histories record that drums served as early warning systems and morale boosters during Mongol campaigns, providing coordination across dispersed forces, yet seldom mention their cultural resonance in uniting diverse tribes. Soft vibrations ripple through the earth as a second drum chimes its tone in response, marking a call to assembly. Mounted warriors exchange nods before tightening their stirrup straps and aligning toward the beating rhythm. An obscure fact preserved in folk memory states that some drums were crafted from the hide of snow leopards valued for their resonant bass, a detail historians are still debating due to scarce physical evidence. In distant yurts, shamans clutch bundles of herbs awaiting the drumbeats to begin purification rites. Sage and juniper smoke spirals upward, mingling with the mist above the grass. Scholars note that Mongol tradition blended shamanic and Tengriist practices, yet they continue to debate how Buddhist influence later transformed these rituals. A gentle breeze carries the muted beats toward commanders who stand in silent rows beneath fluttering banners. Each banner bears symbols denoting unit type, from cavalry to engineers coordinating siege engines. Vestiges of silk scrolls found near Karakoram confirm that drum signals were codified into manuals, though academic arguments persist over the consistency of those manuals across regions. Amidst the gathering warriors, a chorus of hoarse neighs and snorts blends with the drum's cadence, creating an almost musical prelude. The Mongol horse breed's endurance is famed in most sources, describing their ability to run 50 miles a day, yet veterinary analyses of recovered horse bones suggest that average daily distance may have been less under harsh weather conditions, fueling ongoing scholarly debate. A carved drum painted with geometric patterns sits atop a tripod of carved elm wood, its surface taut from centuries-old tanning methods. Ethnographers discovered that tanning involved soaking hides in a solution of boiled nettles and pine resin, a method scarcely mentioned in popular accounts. Gentle flickers of torchlight outline faces marked by battle scars and soot as leaders await further signals. Narratives often emphasize the Khan's voice carrying across fields, yet contemporary research points to drums as a crucial supplement to vocal commands, especially under high winds, but experts still dispute the exact balance between voice and drum. High stakes rest on each thundering note as couriers ride away to relay the drum's meaning to distant columns. Those riders rely on a system known among chronicles as Ordo, which organized mobile encampments and support lines, reinforcing efficiency, though genealogical records hint at earlier Turkic origins, fueling debate on Ordo's genesis. Soft amber glows reflect on intricately woven carpets where maps lie pinned by fluted arrowheads. The maps mark drum stations spaced every 5,000 paces, a measurement derived from traditional paces, but scholars disagree on the true length of a pace used by Mongol surveyors. A low chant drifts from a cluster of tent entrances where families of warriors listen closely, imagining future triumphs and tragedies. Folklore holds that mothers drummed softly on kettle drums to lull children to sleep, instilling early awareness of martial life, though the prevalence of such lullabies remains a subject of contention among historians. Flickering shadows cast by torchlight animate painted wooden idols of Tungri gods placed near the drummers as guardians. Iconographic studies suggest these idols borrowed motifs from Uyghur artisans, yet art historians are still debating the degree of cultural borrowing involved in early Mongol religious art. Gently the drumbeats quicken, signaling scouts to prepare for departure. Leather saddlebags are sealed and tied with rawhide cords while riders adjust their bows and quivers. Chronicles rave about the speed at which scouts covered crests and valleys, yet archaeological surveys show some routes were impractical for swift passage, questioning the uniformity of those claims. A soft exhalation of wind rustles grass blades as the third drumbeat echoes through a narrow valley, amplifying its power. Local tribes along this route adopted similar drumming tactics, adopting the practice into regional campaigns, but academic circles continue to debate if these tactics were Mongol innovations or parallel developments. Vibrations pulse along the taut skin of the drums as sun first peaks over distant hills, casting gold on assembled troops. The beat transitions into a steady march rhythm, prompting kettles of stew and tea to be prepared in communal hearths on the camp outskirts, a logistical feat noted in Song dynasty letters, but scholars remain divided on the scale of these mobile kitchens. A clatter of stirrups signals the beginning of movement among the cavalry regiments. Tassels sway on girths trimmed with goat hair dyed chestnut and amber, a combination whose dye recipe was only recently rediscovered through pigment analysis. Gentle voices murmur prayers as the drum's tempo shifts toward a galloping pulse, indicating imminent advance. Sources agree that drums guided troop maneuvers, yet debate persists over whether symbolic semantics matched uniform-coded signals across the entire empire. Soft hollows in the steppe funnel the sound, carrying pulses toward rear guard contingents, stirring their ranks. Rear units adjusted their pace by counting intervals between beats, a practice mentioned in a few travelers' accounts, yet its consistency and training regimen remain uncertain among scholars. A sudden gust bends tall grass as the drumbeats converge with the sound of horns blown by mounted trumpeters. The dual signals provided redundancy, ensuring orders reached every unit, but disagreement remains on whether horns or drums held primacy in different battlefield scenarios. Woven reins rattle against saddle horns as riders gather their reins in practiced grips, listening for the final crescendo. Rituals surrounding the last drumstroke included offering a sip of fermented mare milk to the drummers, a practice whose prevalence across steppe tribes still fuels scholarly debate. Faint glimmers of pre-dawn stars fade as the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the riders in motion. Histories lavish praise on the Mongol army's mobility, yet climatologists studying steppe weather patterns question whether sudden temperature swings hindered or helped the drum-based coordination they employed. Lean axes and sabers jingle against thigh guards as cavalry divisions pivot at the drum's command, marking a shift from camp life to battle readiness. Archaeological trenches near battlefields reveal patterns of encampment matching drum station placements, yet precise distances and layouts continue to spark academic disagreement. Smooth horsehair brushes drum skins in protective cases as auxiliary units bring spare instruments forward. Metal fittings on the cases bore inscriptions honoring the Khan, a detail noted in Chinese court records, though translation discrepancies leave the exact wording uncertain. Muddy hoofs patter on well-trodden paths toward the front as the final notes of the drum fade into determined silence. That silence carries its own tension, signaling that the moment of decision has arrived, a concept embraced in many traditions but still scrutinized by historians seeking uniform definitions. Bright daylight reveals an ocean of horsemen, their coats gleaming in new sunlight, forming a living tapestry moving in concert to memory and drum. Mainstream sources assert that unity under the drum established frontline cohesion, yet anthropological studies suggest far more reliance on visual flags and messengers than previously thought, stirring ongoing debates. Low whistles from shepherds' flutes echo behind the advance, contrasting with martial drumbeats ahead, blending civility with warlike purpose. Folk songs recount this musical interplay as emblematic of Mongol character, but ethnomusicologists disagree on how widespread such cultural exchanges truly were. A quiet hush falls as drumbeats cease, marking the transition from maneuver to engagement. Tension hangs heavy, yet excitement and dread intertwine as warriors clutch their bows and swords. In scholarly circles, debate rages over how much psychological impact drum silences exerted compared to sudden battle cries, a question still far from settled. Long shadows stretch across the charging host as the final tableau forms under an awakening sky. Drums lie silent, awaiting orders to resume their voice in the chaos ahead, embodying centuries of tradition fused with military innovation. The first glint of lantern light reveals a spread of leather-bound parchments pinned across a low velvet cloth. You lean forward to study networks of faint lines and inked dots marking way stations, rivers, and mountain passes. Mainstream chronicles note that Genghis Khan's scouts produced the most accurate campaign maps of the 13th century, enabling armies to traverse unknown terrain with astonishing precision. An obscure practice among these cartographers involved mixing crushed semi-precious stones into the ink to give maps a slight shimmer by moonlight, a detail rarely mentioned outside specialist studies. Historians are still debating whether these early sketches qualify as the world's first true topographical maps or served merely as crude route guides, a question fueling academic conferences across Central Asia. A hush falls over the gathering as an elderly scout tucks a quill behind his ear and begins to unroll a new scroll. You catch the scent of boiled nettle water and powdered chalk that treated the animal skin parchment to resist dampness. Scholars point to correspondence from Song dynasty ambassadors praising Mongol route-finding methods. Yet they continue to dispute whether Chinese influence or indigenous innovation drove these cartographic advances. The ceremonial unrolling itself follows a strict ritual. The smallest motion could tear the parchment, so writers had to practice with empty maps before handling the real ones. Soft murmurs ripple through the tent when another scout offers a tablet of wax-coated wood as a reusable drafting surface. You reach out to touch its smooth surface and faint ridges left by earlier sketches emerge under your fingertips. This eco-savvy technique allowed multiple drafts before the final copy was inscribed on silk scrolls destined for the Khan's commanders. Debates among modern researchers linger over whether wax tablets were used universally or reserved for initial planning sessions, with some arguing that their use declined rapidly once silk became more affordable. A gentle breeze drifts through the tent's smoke hole and stirs stray curls of hair at the nape of your neck. You pick up a slender reed pen fashioned from bamboo and dip it into a shallow pot of ink brewed from soot and animal glue. Popular histories celebrate the Mongols' speed and ambition, yet they rarely mention this humble moment of creation when armies first take form on parchment. Linguists and historians remain divided on whether the Mongol script itself, adapted from Old Uyghur, facilitated rapid copying of maps or hampered efficiency during the initial conquests. Finely pinched lines trace a hidden mountain pass that winds through jagged ridges barely lower than the surrounding peaks. You slide your finger along the route, imagining scouts guiding caravans through twisting gullies. Archaeological surveys along these ranges uncovered cairns built as trail markers, piles of stones no taller than a man's waist, that only insiders recognized, an enigmatic practice still debated by landscape historians who question their age and intended purpose. Damp night air carries the faint echo of hoofbeats as riders gather around a folded map to memorize coordinates before departing at first light. You observe them pressing fingertips to key landmarks. A lone oak tree, a scattering of boulders, the curve of a riverbank. Folk memory preserves a quirky detail. Scouts sometimes smeared stray pollen on tree bark near these landmarks to refresh the scent and ensure the correct path. A method so perishable it left no lasting traces for modern botanists to confirm. Flickering torchlight illuminates a female scribe from the Turkic tribes, her hands stained indigo from crushing woad berries used to illustrate waterways. You marvel at the contrast between deep blue rivers and ochre plains. While mainstream records credit the empire's military brilliance to cavalry tactics, specialized studies emphasize that vivid map colors sharpen memory for riders traveling long distances. Debate continues over whether color coding was standardized across the YAM stations or varied regionally according to local pigment availability. A small cluster of scouts whispers around a folded chart showing seasonal changes, swollen rivers in spring and hidden sinkholes after monsoon rains. You tuck a corner of the chart under your cloak to read later. Hydrological details like these proved vital for planning raids during wet seasons, but scholars still contest how meticulously Mongols tracked meteorological patterns versus relying on local guides. Ancient runes etched along one border of the map raise speculation about pre-Mongol symbols repurposed by the Khan's geographers. You trace them with your fingertip and wonder at their origin. Some experts argue these glyphs were inherited from Turkic predecessors, while others maintain they represent an indigenous invention to assert Mongol authority. An ongoing academic dispute illustrating how maps themselves became symbols of power. Rough sketches of hidden valleys appear alongside red ink arrows indicating preferred routes for surprise encirclement tactics. You imagine war councils unfurling these maps in candlelit tents to coordinate dawn strikes that bewildered larger armies. Military historians cite these markings as evidence of advanced strategic planning, yet debate whether commanders strictly followed the written arrows or adapted on the ground. Leather straps secure each scroll in oilskin cases to keep moisture at bay as riders gallop through early morning mists. You fasten one case to your saddle and feel the reassuring weight at your side. Ethnographers discovered remnants of oilcloth in relay stations confirming this waterproofing method, but they still discuss whether its primary purpose was protecting text or camouflaging the precious cargo from prying eyes. Smooth ivory inkwells carved from deer antlers sit beside the maps, holding secret inks that reveal additional details only under firelight. You hold a scrap of paper over the flame and watch previously invisible routes appear, drawn with citrus-based ink that oxidizes under heat. Scholars remain divided on the provenance of this chemical trick. Some attribute it to Mongol inventiveness, while others suspect knowledge borrowed from Middle Eastern alchemists encountered during campaigns. Faint grooves scored into wooden drafting tables map out grids used to maintain scale across vast distances. You grip the edges and feel the slight indentations worn smooth by generations of cartographers. Modern researchers debate whether Mongol mapmakers employed a consistent unit of measure or improvised pacing estimates for each region, a debate complicated by variations in steppe terrains. A solemn hush grips the tent as the Khan's chief scout stands to present a final version of the map curled in his arms. You sense the moment's gravity as he bows deeply before handing it to the Khan. Primary sources praise the Khan's personal attention to logistics, yet some historians argue his involvement was ceremonial. Others insist he reviewed every map detail himself in a quest for perfection. Rays of dawn filter through the yurt's central lattice, illuminating maps spread across the Khan's low dais. You step closer as advisors cluster around, pointing to potential choke points where enemy forces might be trapped. Archaeological digs at former battlegrounds have uncovered carved stone waypoints matching these map markers, lending credence to Mongol precision, though the exact correlation remains contested by field archaeologists. A low murmur arises when a corridor of dotted lines suggests an alternative route for supply wagons that bypasses known ambush sites. You lean in to decipher the fine script explaining local bandit activity. Regional annals reference these detours but debate whether they were devised by Mongol scouts or extracted from intelligence provided by captured foes, a question still unresolved. Heavy silk drapes rattle as a sudden breeze sweeps through the tent flaps, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth from distant forests. You wrap your cloak tighter and imagine caravans laden with grain following the plotted forest trail. While economic historians highlight the Khan's interest in controlling trade routes, they argue over how much cartographic evidence translated into actual commercial regulation on the ground. Meticulously drawn symbols depicting watchtowers stand sentry along strategic ridges, each numbered in a secret code known only to the scouts. You cross-reference them with oral directions whispered by local guides who navigated these hills before the Mongol arrival. Debates among geographers persist concerning whether the code was standardized across the empire or tailored to each frontier region, reflecting broader disputes about administrative uniformity. A battered scroll shows signs of repair where tears were stitched together with thin horsehair thread dyed red to blend with the inked routes. You admire the craftsmanship involved in preserving these vital documents. Conservation experts today study these repairs to understand medieval preservation techniques, yet academic discourse remains inconclusive about how widely such mending practices spread. Lanterns flicker once more as a final brigade of scouts breaks camp carrying their sensor maps to hidden stashes. You accompany them out of the tent into the crisp morning air, maps tucked safely beneath cloaks. Local legends recall secret caches hidden beside ancient stone idols, but archaeologists debate whether those idols predate the Mongol era or were erected by the Khan's engineers. Distant peaks glow pink under the rising sun, while the caravan threads its way through whispering grasslands guided by secret maps and murmured directions. You grasp the reins, feeling the leather warm against your palm, and follow the slender edge of the map's path toward destiny. A sudden hush settles over the command tent as the first pale light of dawn filters through the canvas wall and reveals weathered faces etched with concern. Mainstream sources agree that Genghis Khan rewarded merit over birthright when promoting his commanders, a radical departure from traditional tribal hierarchies that fostered fierce loyalty among diverse clans. In the dim glow of a brazier, you notice embroidered armbands on each commander's sleeve indicating their rank and former tribe. An obscure practice recorded in a forgotten travel journal mentions that some armbands were dipped in powdered antimony to claim protection against arrow wounds, though historians still puzzle over how widespread this superstitious treatment actually was. Shifting your gaze to the edges of the tent, you sense whispered conversations among council members questioning the latest order to raise an allied settlement. Historians are still debating whether these brutal directives served as calculated terror tactics or were later exaggerated by chroniclers seeking to magnify the Khan's ruthlessness. A thin breeze stirs the loose scrolls on the low wooden table where commanders pore over maps detailing supply lines and recent skirmish reports. Scars from past battles mark the men's hands as they trace routes with calloused fingertips. Logistics became a cornerstone of Mongol success, and modern studies confirm that systematic supply planning underpinned rapid territorial gains. Barely audible creaks from saddle racks draw your attention to a pair of mounted messengers waiting silently at the tent entrance. Their horses, sleek and vigilant, bear small pouches containing sealed letters. A little-known detail suggests that messengers sometimes wrote false decoy orders on parchment to mislead enemy spies, a tactic whose actual use remains under dispute among military historians. Faint murmurs ripple through the assembled council when a wizened advisor raises concerns about the Khan's recent decree to disband local militias and centralize command. Some scholars argue this consolidation prevented rebellions, while others contend it risked alienating longtime allies, illustrating a debate still alive in academic circles. Distant drumbeats signal the approach of fresh reports from scouts patrolling the northern ridge. The rhythm quickens pulses in chests already tight with unease. Official records celebrate these patrols as unwavering sentinels of security, yet field notes hint at lapses exploited by cunning bandits challenging the system's infallibility. A slender commander drapes a fur cloak across his shoulders before addressing his peers in a low voice that carries through the tent. His speech highlights the Khan's grant of religious freedom to conquered peoples, a policy praised in most histories but now questioned by some researchers who point to isolated incidents of forced conversion. Soft rustling of paper accompanies the unsealing of a crimson wax seal on a fresh dispatch. The seal bears a stylized eagle motif rarely used outside the Khan's inner circle. Obscure numismatic studies identify the eagle as a symbol borrowed from neighboring Khitan tribes, though consensus eludes experts on its precise adoption timeline. Shadows converge as two tribal emissaries slip into the tent bearing offerings of dried fruits and spiced nuts. Their gifts reflect a centuries-old diplomacy custom meant to soften harsh political requests. Ethnographers continue to debate whether such rituals were formalized by a written code or passed down informally by word of mouth. Oil lamps sputter as the discussion shifts to troop morale after weeks of relentless winter drilling. Commanders share rumors of frostbitten horses abandoned along supply routes, a rare admission in official annals that nonetheless appears in local oral histories preserved by nomadic descendants. A sudden gust rattles the tent poles as a junior officer presents a fragment of correspondence intercepted from a rebel faction. The fragment warns of potential uprisings among recently subjugated clans, sparking renewed concern over the limits of the Khan's authority. Historians disagree over how close such insurrections came to seriously threatening Mongol unity. A brief silence follows as the war council contemplates the intercepted letter. Scrawled in hurried script, the words hint at betrayals within the Khan's own ranks, a charge some chroniclers dismiss as later propaganda, while others consider it a credible sign of internal fractures. Low drips echo when a stray bead of candle wax drops onto the dusty map table. Attention refocuses as commanders trace the map to identify vulnerable flanks. Geographical precision in Mongol cartography often impresses military analysts, yet archaeologists remain divided over the exact locations marked by faded ink. A messenger clears his throat and raises a folded parchment stamped with the Khan's tamga. His voice trembles slightly as he relays a directive to reassign a seasoned general from the Western Front to an eastern province. Popular accounts hail such reassignments as proof of the Khan's strategic vision, though skeptics assert they sometimes stemmed from personal rivalries rather than objective assessments. Rustling cloaks offer a faint accompaniment to the council's murmured deliberations. A commander cites a past campaign in the Gobi Desert where shifting sands swallowed entire brigades under his watch. This anecdote reinforces his argument for caution, but mainstream historians debate its accuracy based on contradictory Persian chronicles. Faint glints of frost appear on metal arrowheads stacked nearby, reminding onlookers of the harsh season testing both men and beasts. Experimental archaeology has shown that Mongol engineers developed portable forging stations to repair weapons in the field, yet scholars disagree on how often these workshops accompanied the main army. A crackling fire sends dance-like reflections across water skins hung along the tent edges. Commanders dip dried meat into hot broth before resuming discussions on supply chain integrity. Nutritional studies on recovered kitchen pits confirm the reliance on protein-rich rations to sustain energy, though interpretations vary on the proportion of meat versus grain in daily diets. A slender shaft of light pierces a corner where a young lieutenant hunches over a ledger detailing troop enlistments from allied tribes. Record-keeping impressed contemporaries with its thoroughness, yet modern researchers still debate whether these ledgers recorded actual headcounts or served more as ceremonial tallies to impress visiting dignitaries. Rusty hinges moan as a side flap of the tent opens to admit a weather-beaten courier. He bows deeply and lays out a slate tablet etched with recent weather predictions. Such meteorological forecasting aided campaign planning according to some sources, but climatologists question the precision and reliability of these early steppe weather observations. Soft echoes of hoofbeats drift away as another rider departs, clutching a sealed order to disperse reinforcements to the northern outpost. The act underscores the tension between centralized control and local autonomy, fueling an ongoing debate about the true extent of the Khan's direct oversight over distant territories. A murmur rises when the tent's elder recites a clause from the Yasa emphasizing unity and unwavering loyalty to the great Khan, a familiar passage in most histories that nevertheless sparks disagreement among scholars over its actual enforcement in remote regions. Gentle snorts from resting horses beyond the camp. Moonlight filters through tufts of grass as mounted sentries circle the camp perimeter, maintaining the first line of defense. In the faint glow, you notice slender figures perched on rocky outcrops, their eyes scanning shadowy hollows for any sign of movement. Mainstream histories record that Genghis Khan established a formal network of scouts and lookouts to report enemy activity within 100 miles, illustrating early organized intelligence gathering. An obscure practice involved assigning specially trained eagles to perched handlers who released the birds at dusk to patrol overhead, a detail still debated by scholars regarding its prevalence and effectiveness. Whispers carried on the wind alert hidden watchers when unfamiliar silhouettes drift near supply wagons stacked with grain and leather. In those moments you press your back against a cold yurt wall, remembering a little-known fact that Mongol spies sometimes disguised themselves as wandering traders armed with false wares to gain access to enemy camps. Experts continue to argue whether such agents were state-sponsored or opportunistic volunteers, complicating our understanding of structured espionage in nomadic societies. Hidden among distant dunes lie silent observers in handheld pits lined with felt to muffle breathing and movement. When a patrol of enemy scouts breaches the outer ring, you watch as your fellow observer signals with a twitch of his cloak. Most accounts credit the Mongols with co-opting Turkic intelligence methods, yet historians still debate the degree of direct influence versus independent nomadic innovation in shaping their spycraft. Early evening fog drapes over hillocks as you trek toward a rendezvous with a network of informants embedded within rival tribes. Common chronicles emphasize the Khan's reliance on local defectors to deliver timely reports, while modern research suggests he maintained a cadre of full-time agents, drawing controversy over whether these were officially recorded within the imperial administration. Silvered shadows flicker on weathered faces when tribal informers pass coded messages sewn into leather garments kept under their tunics. An unusual custom recorded in a solitary Persian source claims that some messages were written on thin strips of birch bark hidden in horses' hooves, yet credible corroboration remains elusive. Academic debates over the authenticity of these reports persist, reflecting broader disputes about the Mongol intelligence archive. Flickers of torchlight dance across a narrow mountain pass where a silent scout crouches beside a cairn signaling the nearest relay station. Minutes later you glimpse a black cowl emerge from behind the rocks carrying a scroll sealed with an ambiguous emblem different from the tamga. Folk memory and fragmented chronicles disagree on whether this represented a specialized spy division or a regional anomaly, fueling heated discourse among military historians. An owl's shriek echoes through the night as you trace ghostly footprints of deserters who escaped with prized horses. Scouts say domesticated mustangs sometimes bolted at first alarm, so spies mark trails by tying thin ribbons to brambles, a covert signpost overlooked by pursuing trackers. Experts remain divided on how widely this practice was used across varied terrains, highlighting the patchwork nature of early Mongol reconnaissance. A distant horn hums low once to summon hidden operatives to deliver fresh intelligence to the Khan's camp. When couriers approach under cover of darkness, you feel the adrenaline of knowing an enemy plan lies cradled in their saddlebags. Standard histories emphasize the horn as a battlefield signal, yet specialists argue it also functioned as a clandestine code heard only by trained ears. Smoky embers glow in a secluded alcove where tribal defectors gather to relay rumors of alliance shifts among rival warlords. You lean in to catch whispered names and numbers sketched on bark by trembling fingers. While some chronicles treat these defections as isolated incidents, others maintain they were systematic undermining tactics orchestrated from the center, a contentious point among scholars. Moonbeams reflect off polished steel blades stashed behind loose stones, mementos of covert encounters where scouts bribed enemy watchmen. This practice of awarding weapons as hush payments appears in a few travelers' tales, but lacks consensus among historians about its scale or ethical implications within the broader conquest strategy. Hidden markers carved into tree bark guide silent messengers through dense woodlands toward secret way stations. You follow these notches painted with sap to weatherproof the inscriptions. Ethnographic studies note similar tree markers in Siberian shaman traditions, though debate continues on whether Mongol scouts adopted them independently or learned from neighboring shamans. A sudden rustle in tall grass unveils a lone figure garbed in dark cloth, slipping a codified strip of hide through a crack in the tent flap. In that instant you recall a seldom-cited note that couriers sometimes attach tiny bells tuned to low frequencies so only listeners attuned to the code would hear them, despite concerns over alerting livestock. Flickering lantern light reveals a map tucked into the folds of a hunter's cloak, taken by spies the previous night. You spread it out on an upturned crate, tracing enemy camp layouts based on precise sketches drawn under torchlight. Debate lingers among cartographers about whether such maps were commissioned by the Great Khan or produced spontaneously by resourceful defectors. Soft whispers bounce off tent walls as interpreters transcribe coded phrases into Mongolian script. One contested translation reads like a warning of impending betrayal within the Khan's own ranks, prompting commanders to tighten their trust networks. Scholars still dispute the authenticity of the source text and whether it reflects genuine conspiracy or later fabrication. Hidden wells along the steppe served as secret meeting points for spies to swap encrypted messages beneath the cover of grazing herds. Shadows shift as you approach one such well to collect a small clay token embossed with a cipher only your handler can read. The well's use as an intelligence hub is recorded in passing by Song dynasty envoys, yet its exact function remains puzzling. Eagles perched overhead signal danger when raptors circle unnaturally low above the spike of tents. A rare detail recorded by Persian chroniclers claims these birds reacted instinctively to disguised enemy archers poised on ridgelines, though ornithologists still question whether the behavior was trained or coincidental. Thick leather gloves muffle the shaking hands of informants who slip you thin reeds etched with glyphs invisible to the uninitiated. Later you heat the reeds over embers to reveal the clandestine message. Whether this citrus-based ink trick spread westward along Silk Road networks or originated locally in the Altai remains contested in chemical analyses. Trail dust settles through the pre-dawn chill as spies don common nomad attire to blend with migrant herders heading east with dry cheese and barley. Each disguised agent carries small jars of fermented mare's milk to sustain energy without relying on local wells, a survival tactic confirmed by residue analysis in relay caches, yet its omnipresence in spy rations is still debated. A sudden quiver of anticipation runs through the camp as night watchers signal the Khan's commander by raising a single torch from the ground. That gesture codes for immediate briefing on enemy movements, a system lauded for reliability albeit contested by some historians who question its vulnerability to misinterpretation under windy conditions. Wooden benches surround a dim brazier where captured spies sit blindfolded awaiting interrogation that blends gentle persuasion with quiet threats. One whispered interrogation method involved reciting the yassa in reverse to induce confusion, though credibility for this psychological tactic remains scant among academic circles. Faint patterns of hoofprints lead you to an abandoned spy cache beside a dried river bed filled with rolled parchments and sealed pouches. Archaeologists excavating similar caches found fragments of maps and disguised weapons, fueling debate over whether these stashes were part of a centralized intelligence network or ad hoc survival caches. The horizon softens with early light, prompting the latest messenger to slip away carrying a report of imminent enemy coalition from the western tribes. You watch his silhouette blend into the vast grassland, a testament to the steppe's boundless scale and the silent war waged beneath starlit skies. Dust drifts across sharpened arrows as dawn approaches, filling the camp with an electric stillness pregnant with anticipation. In that moment you realize the silent spies and vigilant watchers form the unseen scaffold supporting the Khan's swift conquests, a legacy whose precise mechanics scholars are still unraveling. Moonlight glints on icy canvas stretched tight over each tent as pale frost crystals cling to woven fibers and wooden stakes. Within hours, the camp will stir to the harsh reality of sub-zero temperatures that Mongol armies routinely endured during year-round operations, a testament to their logistical mastery. Field manuals credit the use of portable heating stones wrapped in cloth as a primary method for warding off freezing conditions, yet historians are still debating how widely this technique spread beyond elite units into the ranks of ordinary soldiers. Under that same moon, riders whispered of smearing goat fat on leather boots and saddle flaps to repel frost, an obscure trick cited in only a few surviving travelers' notes but likely essential for long winter marches. Lantern light flickers as warriors drape themselves in layered pelts of fox, wolf and sheepskin sourced from Siberian trappers whose prized horses often fetched higher prices than their furs. Recent fur analysis from steppe archaeological digs confirms heavy reliance on these pelts for insulation, though scholars continue to dispute whether they were issued centrally by Khan's administrators or privately supplied by wealthier clans. Beneath thick wool cloaks, riders huddle close to small fire pots fueled by charcoal and clarified sheep fat, their warmth a fleeting comfort in a landscape ruled by ice and wind. A faint hiss breaks the stillness when hot water from a field kitchen spills onto frozen flatbread crusted with ice crystals. Mongol armies maintained mobile kitchens mounted on heavy wagons capable of boiling water for tea, soup, and nourishing stews, an innovation credited with sustaining morale during extended campaigns. Some argue these kitchens were improvised ad hoc responses by resourceful quartermasters, while others insist they were part of a formalized system established by Genghis Khan himself, a point still under scholarly debate about the empire's administrative sophistication. Thick iron stoves stand sentinel inside the largest yurts, their polished chimneys venting spirals of smoke upward through the tent canopy. Ethnographers examining sites in eastern Kazakhstan uncovered remnants of such stoves, constructed from pressed clay and metal fittings, confirming their use among command tents. Debate continues over whether these stoves were reserved for high-ranking officers or available to all units, with arguments hinging on the archaeological absence of stove fragments at more remote encampments. Soft crackles echo across the camp as fire tenders stoke smoldering embers into life, positioning heated stones in shallow pits lined with felt and animal hide. Soldiers tuck these glowing bundles into the folds of their cloaks, pressing them to limbs numb from the cold. While contemporary accounts celebrate Mongol resilience, modern experimental reconstructions disagree on how effective heated stones truly were at maintaining body temperature over extended periods, feeding ongoing debates among military historians. Distant flags snap in the wind atop wooden poles marking key command posts where generals gather over frost-rimmed maps drawn on oiled parchment. Cartographic specialists note that Mongol scouts meticulously charted winter routes to avoid treacherous river crossings and hidden sinkholes. Yet they still argue over how precisely these maps reflected real-time environmental changes. A few surviving scrolls reveal margin notes warning of thin ice and shifting snowdrifts, an uncommon detail that challenges assumptions about the limits of medieval reconnaissance. Riders exchange knowing glances as they fasten leather satchels containing vinegar vials used to melt ice on weapon barrels and stirrups in a matter of seconds, a little-known tactic praised in some Persian embassies' reports. These acidic bursts of heat kept steel from cracking in frigid air, although scholars remain divided on whether vinegar treatments were widespread or simply experimental trials by inventive smiths in the Khan's retinue. Bright embers glow within clay firepots fashioned for quick startup and minimal fuel consumption, each crafted by blacksmiths who followed secret recipes passed down through generations. Metallurgists studying recovered bellows and forge fragments argue that Mongol engineers imported Chinese charcoal and combined it with local ores for superior heat control, a cross-cultural exchange that still sparks controversy over its scope and influence on later steppe metallurgy. A low rumble signals the arrival of heavy wagon trains laden with additional supplies drawn from caravan routes secured under Mongol control. Each wagon's wooden wheels feature iron hoops blackened by heating and quenching to resist cracking, a wheel hoop treatment praised in logistical treatises yet questioned by field archaeologists who point to uneven hoop distributions at excavation sites, hinting at regional variations in workshop practices. Hearth fires sputter as cooks stir cauldrons of fermenting mare's milk known as kumis, its alcohol content a mild balm against the cold and a dietary mainstay for nomadic warriors. Pottery shards from relay stations bear residue confirming kumis consumption, although historians debate its relative importance compared to preserved meats and grains in the soldier's daily ration. Soft lamplight reveals woven tapestries hung against tent walls not just for decoration but as insulation, their heavy wool threads trapping pockets of warm air. Surviving fragments from 13th century encampments demonstrate dual-purpose craft, a practice seldom acknowledged in military histories yet vital for survival in sub-zero conditions. Textile experts still dispute how standardized these insulating hangings were across the Mongol camp network. A sudden gust rattles the tent flaps as orders arrive for an immediate winter offensive, a bold gamble that underscored the Khan's willingness to fight in conditions most armies avoided. Chronicles admire his audacity, but strategic analysts question whether the gains outweighed the costs in horses and human endurance, fueling debate on the true efficacy of winter campaigns in expanding or draining the empire's resources. Clinking iron tools cooled by frost sit beside freshly honed blades on a makeshift anvil, evidence of portable forging stations that accompanied the main army. Some argue these field forges were standard issue, a testament to Mongol engineering foresight, while others maintain they were only deployed when campaigns extended deep into enemy territory, a detail that remains contested among archaeologists. Moisture-resistant oilcloth wraps scrolled dispatches to keep them dry as they pass through sub-zero winds, each case tied with rawhide thongs. Digital scans of surviving letters indicate careful waterproofing, but debate endures over whether these measures were part of centralized logistical protocols or improvised by individual couriers to safeguard precious orders. Soft patters of hoofbeats on frozen grass announce the approach of early morning cavalry drilling under the faint glow of lanterns. Troops practice rapid formations to avoid exposure during maneuvers, a technique praised in Song dynasty missives, yet questioned by some military historians who argue that weather conditions often disrupted even the best-trained units. Warmth-cracked mittens lie on benches near heated stones, their fingerless design allowing archers to maintain trigger dexterity despite numb fingers. Debates among reenactment specialists challenge whether mittens or full gloves offered better balance between warmth and control, illustrating the fine margins that decided battles in frigid air. Faint greenish glimmers appear in watchtower footholds where guards track secret signals made from bioluminescent lichen harvested from nearby forests. This curious signaling method is recorded in only a handful of oral traditions, leaving biologists skeptical of its practicality and historians divided over whether the practice was widespread or an isolated experiment. Soft horns and muted drumbeats coordinate troop movements across snow-covered fields when visibility drops to near zero. Military chronologies praise this dual signal system for redundancy, but some dawn paints the horizon in pale gold as thousands of hooves begin to drum against dew-soaked earth, signaling the start of another day and the moment of reckoning for rival armies positioned on opposite sides of a gentle rise. Mainstream histories tell us that Genghis Khan orchestrated simultaneous assaults at first light to catch opponents unprepared and exploit morning mists. Less often mentioned is the Khan's habit of personally inspecting weather patterns before dawn to ensure favorable wind directions would carry his war cries and horn signals to every unit. Scholars still debate how much meteorological observation influenced his timing versus pure tactical daring, yet no one denies the psychological edge gained by striking while foes still blinked awake. Hooves thunder in perfect unison as cavalry formations fan out across the steppe like great wings unfolding from a central body. Archers plant their knees firmly against saddle flaps, tightening leather straps until bows rest ready on their thighs. A little-known tactic involved coating bowstrings in a mixture of tallow and powdered resin to mute the twang of release and prevent nighttime frost from snapping strings during pre-dawn maneuvers. Field experiments by modern reenactors produced mixed results, feeding ongoing debate about how much this treatment enhanced the element of surprise versus simply providing routine maintenance. Arrows arc across the brightening sky in deadly rain, as horn signals echo from distant watchtowers to coordinate volleys between multiple wings. Each shaft carries a barbed head forged in portable forges that accompanied the armies, a logistical marvel rarely acknowledged in grand narratives. Ballistics tests conducted in recent decades suggest that Mongol archers achieved rates of fire comparable to modern competitive shooters while riding at full gallop. Historians continue to dispute whether raw volume of arrows or the deadly accuracy honed through disciplined practice proved more decisive in dismantling massed infantry formations. Cavalry wings pivot with mechanical precision on signal from mounted trumpeters whose ivory horns cut through the dawn air. Dust spirals into the air as flanking units swing round and converge on the enemy's rear, completing a hammer and anvil maneuver that trapped defenders in a kill zone. While the brutality of this tactic appears in most chronicles, some military analysts question whether coordination ever reached the perfection described or whether confusion and individual initiative often dictated outcomes on the ground. Smoke spirals above torched palisades as engineers use portable fire pots to launch flaming projectiles over walls, igniting wooden towers and sending defenders into disarray. Chemical residue recovered from fortifications at several battlefields confirms the use of pitch and sulfur mixtures. Yet debate persists about whether these incendiaries were manufactured centrally in Mongol estates or improvised by local blacksmiths pressed into service during campaigns. That uncertainty underscores the diffused nature of Mongol logistical networks, reliant on both imperial supply lines and regional resources. Messengers weave through the chaos to deliver fresh orders clipped to saddle stirrups, enabling real-time adjustments to evolving battle plans. These riders carry coded tablets painted with heat-reactive ink that reveals new tactical directives only when warmed over a hidden flame, ensuring that even if captured, their contents remain unintelligible. Scholars remain divided on whether this clever system originated with Turkic allies or was an original Mongol innovation, illustrating the hybrid character of steppe warfare. Shouts rise like thunder as a secondary force sweeps through abandoned trenches, left by defenders forced from their positions by relentless pressure. Horses rear and panic among the fleeing infantry, their movements funneling soldiers toward kill squads waiting with lances leveled at chest height. While many sources emphasize Mongol horsemanship, forensic analysis of skeletal remains at mass graves indicates that the final moments of each engagement were often chaotic and merciless, rather than the choreographed maneuver suggested by official accounts. Seized siege engines arrive on the field as engineers assemble captured counterweight trebuchets from prefabricated parts and local timber. In some cases, these engines were turned against the very fortresses that surrendered earlier in the campaign, a symbolic reversal seldom noted in mainstream summaries. Modern reconstructions of these machines reveal that setup time could exceed several hours, yet Mongol commanders rarely labored under constraints of traditional siegecraft, allowing swift redeployment to new targets after breaching initial defenses. Victory calls echo across the plain as warriors uproot enemy standards and stake them into their own lines, a visible declaration of conquest that sent a message to surrounding regions. Contemporary scribes described the sound of poles ripping from palisades as a symphony of triumph. Casualty counts recorded by local chroniclers range wildly from a few hundred to several thousand, a discrepancy that continues to stir passionate debate among historians regarding the human cost of these lightning raids. After the dust settles, survivors are sorted into waves. Those selected for enslavement, those ransomed for coin, and those released to spread tales of Mongol might. Traders among the enslaved later provided valuable intelligence on distant markets and potential allies, while those ransomed furnished priceless silver and grain. Economic historians are still arguing whether forced population transfers served strategic ends beyond immediate spoils, or whether they sowed the seeds for future rebellions against Mongol authority. Spoils of war gleam in the morning sun as cavalry fan out to secure supply lines and forage for fresh mounts. Captured horses were often pressed into service by Mongol remount stations established at regular intervals, a practice referenced in Chinese court records, but whose true scale remains a matter of conjecture due to patchy documentation. Archaeologists continue to uncover mass horse burial sites that suggest large numbers of mounts fell in battle or perished under harsh conditions, emphasizing the hidden toll of conquest. Quiet moments follow as commanders gather in the flickering glow of warming stones to review lessons learned and dispatch further instructions. These war councils were both reflection on success and planning for the next engagement in an endless string of campaigns sweeping across Eurasia. Debates rage in academic circles over whether this continuous cycle of conquest was sustainable or whether the eventual fragmentation of the empire owed more to overextension than to external pressures. Shadows lengthen across the field as trumpets signal the formal conclusion of the battle and drumbeats call off active pursuit. Veterans tend wounds and bind arrows while camp followers erect temporary hospitals beside smoldering ruins. Ethnographers have documented the presence of mobile medical units using herbal poultices made from local plants, yet medical historians argue over how effective these treatments truly were in preventing infections and promoting recovery under field conditions. Morning mist rises in pale swirls as survivors and victors alike look toward the next horizon where another target awaits. The roar of conquest that breaks the morning's first rays reveal a long ribbon of camels and horses winding across the desert like a living artery pulsing with silk bolts, pearls, and spices. Mainstream histories agree that under Genghis Khan's oversight the Pax Mongolica transformed the Silk Road into the safest trade network of its age, linking Chang'an to Constantinople in record time. Hundreds of caravanserai once left to ruin were restored or newly built, offering shelter and water across more than 7,000 miles. A surprising detail preserved in a dozen scattered Persian merchant diaries notes that traders sometimes hung tiny clay whistles from their saddles to ward off desert spirits believed to prey on lone travelers. Scholars are still debating whether those whistles served more as genuine talismans with mystical overtones or simply as morale-boosting trinkets that reminded merchants of home. Merchants pause every dawn at fortified tamga posts where stewards clad in quilted armor stamp official seals on leather passports. Archaeological digs in Bokhara and Merv have unearthed hundreds of these tamga tokens, each a stamped emblem of the Great Khan's authority assuring safe passage. Economic historians differ on whether these stamps functioned primarily as a form of taxation enriching the imperial treasury or as courtesy passes guaranteeing diplomatic privileges to favored traders. Recent analysis of tanga distribution suggests that different goods, textiles, precious metals, and spices carried distinct seals, indicating a complex tiered system that combined revenue collection with commercial regulation. Tamga posts stand alongside water cisterns and mud-brick caravansary walls where weary traders and their animals rest before continuing westward or eastward. Some of these inns date back to pre-Mongol Seljuk constructions but were vastly expanded under Mongol rule. Letters from Venetian envoys praise the cleanliness of latrines and regular inspections of food stores. Yet debates persist over whether sanitation protocols were decreed centrally in Karakorum or emerged through initiatives by local governors seeking to attract commerce. One contested theory suggests that a hidden levy on spice imports financed these improvements, based on fragments of tax ledgers found near Kashgar that list unusual line items under road maintenance. Critics argue those records may have been later forgeries intended to obscure local graft. Caravans once guarded by small tribal escorts now travel under the protection of dedicated yam couriers who run relay stations every 20 to 30 miles. Mainstream sources celebrate the yam network's expansion under Mongol administration as cutting communication times by more than half. A seldom mentioned nuance appears in a single Persian embassy report claiming that merchants could pay a premium for priority in the relay queues, effectively buying faster mail service. Trade scholars clash over whether merchant correspondence truly shared the same priority as military dispatches, or whether it was subordinated in times of conflict, suggesting a subtle hierarchy in postal operations. Couriers gallop through dawn mists clutching leather pouches filled with Genghis Khan's letters and merchants' trade agreements alike. Portable forges carried by scouting parties produced horseshoes and arrowheads on the move, ensuring reliability of transport and defense. Historians continue to debate how much of that metalworking capacity was centralized in imperial workshops versus improvised by local blacksmiths along the route. Evidence of charcoal kilns near remote relay posts hints at wider logistical coordination, though the scope of these operations remains a subject of scholarly dispute. Translators crouch beside glowing hearths in caravan tents, navigating contracts rendered in Uyghur script, Persian, Turkic, and Chinese. Official records note that language specialists were appointed directly by Mongol governors to promote unbiased exchanges. Yet ethnographers highlight oral traditions of freelance scribes who shifted loyalties based on personal networks and payment. Folklore surveys collected in Central Asia describe translators swearing oaths dipped in kumis, the fermented mare's milk of the steppe, to guarantee impartiality. Whether those oaths carried real legal weight or served merely as ceremonial gestures continues to divide academic opinion. Bazaar tents unfurl across oasis markets beneath high canvas awnings, displaying Kashmiri shawls, Chinese porcelain, and Syrian glassware. Spices piled in conical mounds, cumin, sumac, saffron, fill the air with exotic aromas. Chemical residue tests on cooking pots from long-abandoned encampments confirm widespread use of locally foraged seasonings mixed with imported peppercorns. Yet economic historians argue fiercely about whether these flavorings significantly influenced broader trade patterns or remained niche luxuries for elite caravans. Spices stored in cedar chests traveled under close guard as the most valuable cargo on the road. Lapis lazuli dust from Badakhshan mixed into select shipments gave garments a distinctive sheen that fetched premium prices in Baghdad. Archaeobotanists studying residue in spice jars endorse the authenticity of these early dyeing practices, but they remain divided over the precise origins of trade routes that carried lapis beyond Tibetan highlands. One contested hypothesis posits that lapis passed first through Sogdian middlemen before reaching Mongol markets, a claim still hotly debated due to fragmentary caravan records. Uyghur script dominates ledger books kept at way stations, evidence of the Khan's pragmatic adoption of an existing script to streamline record-keeping. Some specialists propose that Sogdian and even Hebrew scripts saw occasional use among minority merchant communities, a theory based on marginal notes found in a small cache of documents near Turpan. Others argue those marginalia represent isolated scribbles rather than evidence of formal record-keeping, underscoring the patchwork nature of documentation on the Silk Road. Pilgrims and envoys of many faiths traversed the road freely under Mongol protection. Nestorian priests, Buddhist lamas, Muslim jurists, and Zoroastrian magi share caravanserai kitchens and prayer spaces. The policy of religious toleration is well documented in imperial decrees, but some scholars argue that in strategic cities the Khan imposed subtle pressures favoring certain religious communities to secure loyalty and tax advantages. A surprising inscription discovered in a cave temple near Dunhuang praises an anonymous Mongol benefactor for donating sacred texts, becoming a focal point in debates over whether the Khan's patronage of religions was sincere or purely pragmatic. Manuscripts carried by couriers include not only commercial contracts but also scientific treatises and astronomical tables. Fragments of manuscripts recovered from desert graves show ciphered passages written in reversible ink, legible only when heated by a candle flame. Questions persist about whether these ciphers aimed to conceal trade secrets from rival merchants or served instructional functions for elite scholars engaged in diplomatic missions. Philologists remain divided on the origins of these coding techniques, some tracing them to Central Asian alchemists encountered during early campaigns. Cartographers sketch maps by oil lamp light, marking mountain passes and caravanserai locations in detail that astonishes modern historians. Invisible ink trails occasionally denote hidden water sources or tribal encampments, covert details destined to aid Mongol scout parties but omitted from official copies. Debates swirl over the authenticity of these invisible annotations and whether they represent genuine Mongol innovations or later apocryphal additions by travelers seeking exclusive knowledge. Watchtowers manned by loyal guards line the steppes at regular intervals, serving as beacon stations when fires lit at night signal clear roads and safe passage. One obscure custom recorded by a single Chinese traveler describes the use of polished bronze mirrors to flash sunlight across towers as an optical telegraph, relaying messages up to 20 miles in minutes. The feasibility of this technique remains under scholarly scrutiny, with some optical historians dismissing it as impractical given the region's frequent dust storms. Stewards tally goods at each major station using bronze scales stamped with official tamga weights. Scale fragments found in excavations reveal inscriptions documenting repeated repairs over decades, suggesting these measures remained in continuous use through successive generations of rulers. Whether the standard weight was imposed from Karakoram or developed locally as a compromise among diverse merchant groups remains a contested question among metrology experts. Legends of secret fees and occasional raids by rogue Mongol contingents persist in local folklore, hinting at the fragile balance between open commerce and imperial control. The Silk Road under the Great Khan emerged as a world-spanning marketplace, but one shaded by complexity, negotiation, and the ever-present hum of political intrigue. Modern scholarship continues to unravel its layers, debating the true extent of uniform protection, the mechanics of long-distance administration, and the human stories etched into the dusty paths where silk and sound of hoofbeats once wove an empire into being. Candlelight flickers across the low wooden dais as you step into the Khan's makeshift tribunal yurt where benches carved from yak horns circle a smoldering brazier. Mainstream histories tell us that Genghis Khan instituted the yasa, a code of laws proclaimed to bind his empire with swift and impartial justice, often delivered at these field courts under lantern light. Embers glow beneath a suspended pot of water used to heat metal seals before stamping verdict scrolls in softened wax. Observers note that grave sentences, from exile to death, were pronounced within hours of accusation, reflecting an efficiency rare among contemporary states. Some scholars debate whether the speed of judgment served justice or merely reinforced fear, questioning if legal consistency could exist alongside such rapid proceedings. Flickers of unease settle in your chest as you realize the lantern's glow reveals every twitch of a condemned man's face, every whisper of an onlooker's doubt. Shadows dance along the tent walls while tribal emissaries and Mongol commanders gather around a low stool where a stern judge in fur bedding presides over each case. Accusations range from theft of livestock to betrayal of war plans, and passages of the yasa are recited in a resonant voice punctuated by the judge's hammer strike on a flint slab. An obscure detail recorded by a Tibetan envoy mentions that magistrates sometimes used bone tally sticks to record counts of offenses, splitting small wooden rods at notched intervals to represent criminal history, a practice rarely attested outside this context. Underfoot the ground is layered with straw to absorb blood and spilled tea, creating a hush that heightens every syllable. Counselors whisper that some judges concealed dried fish heads beneath their robes as symbols of unblemished truth, a bizarre custom whose origin remains debated among cultural historians. Archers stand guard at the edges of the circle, their bows slung over shoulders wrapped in soft wool, ready to enforce sentences without question. Scrolls listing verdicts sit in a neat stack beside the presiding magistrate, each one sealed with the tamga of the Khan's closest aide. Mainstream accounts note that executions were sometimes carried out at the same site immediately after sentencing to underline the Khan's resolve. You catch a glimpse of a horned executioner sharpening an axe by the brazier's heat, his leather apron stained by previous appointments. Field reports from Persian chroniclers describe these ceremonies as swift and orderly, yet modern legal scholars argue about the extent to which defense pleas were heard or merely recorded for form's sake. Beneath the curved yurt ceiling hang small woven talismans pressed between drooping strands of horsehair that shamanic judges believed would ward off false testimony and ensure truth prevailed. A torch flickers nearby, casting elongated figures across the faces of witnesses testifying under oath. Observers lean forward, their breath visible in cold drafts swirling in through tent vents. An enigmatic practice involved requiring accused parties to hold a red-hot iron rod and step across heated stones to prove innocence, a trial by ordeal whose efficacy scholars still dispute. Archaeologists point to charred footprints found at former war courts as evidence, though ethno-historians caution that these remnants may reflect later ritual dramatizations rather than actual judicial tools. Heated metal seals hiss as they meet cooled wax, imprinting the Khan's emblem onto parchment scrolls that outline each charge and punishment in concise Mongol script. Sentences ranged from fines paid in silver coins to exile beyond a set of boundary stones, enforcing the Khan's will across vast distances. Common soldiers and tribal leaders alike appeared before this tribunal, suggesting a level of legal uniformity notable for a nomadic empire. Some historians insist this equity under law was instrumental in securing loyalty, while others argue it masked class privileges that favored Mongol elites over newly conquered subjects. Scrolls stacked on a wooden table list multiple cases, each entry accompanied by a witness seal pressed into colored ink. Scribes crouch nearby, using erasure tools shaped like falcon talons to correct mistakes before the wax dries. Dust motes shimmer in the lantern glow as the judge reviews each account, occasionally tapping a finger to summon counsel or cross-examine testimony. Mainstream sources praise this attention to detail as evidence of a surprisingly advanced bureaucratic apparatus, yet debates linger on how consistently such procedures were implemented across frontier courts versus the imperial heartlands. Flickers of torchlight illuminate the hushed murmur of rival clans exchanging glances as one by one they hear verdicts that could realign local power structures. The Khan's decree that brigandage be punished by death on sight leaves little room for mercy, yet exemptions existed for those who performed exceptional service in recent campaigns. An unusual clause in surviving records required that criminals who had saved Mongol lives in battle receive commuted sentences, a quirk scholars link to Temujin's personal experiences of loyalty and indebtedness, though the frequency of its invocation remains a topic of scholarly dispute. Spectators form a tight ring around the central court, clutching small lanterns to illuminate passages of open scrolls. Traders from distant regions serve as informal observers, noting how justice under the Yasa encourages trade by curbing local disputes before they metastasize. Mainstream economic studies credit this legal clarity with boosting long-distance commerce, but some critics argue that harsh punishments led to covert resistance and secret feuds, a factor often overlooked in grand narratives of Pax Mongolica. Flint sparks fly as guards rekindle torches to guide the judge to a second dais where appeals are heard beneath a heavy red curtain. Tribal leaders present petitions carved on wooden tablets invoking ancient customs in hopes of leniency. Linguistic experts find little evidence of standardized appeal procedures in surviving texts, fueling debate over whether these post-verdict hearings reflected genuine legal recourse or mere ritual theater designed to placate local elites. Magistrates lean forward over candlelit benches to receive final petitions before the Khan's envoy stamps each appeal with a bold seal granting or denying review. The hush deepens as a single candle gutter threatens to extinguish, symbolizing the precarious balance between mercy and authority. Modern legal historians argue that the tension between centralized edicts and tribal rights created a flexible justice system that adapted rapidly to local conditions, though the exact mechanisms of reconciliation remain elusive in the fragmented records. Whispers echo through the tent as the last case concludes, and in the flicker of a lantern the judge rises to signal closure of the court. Scrolls are bundled and echoes roll across smoldering earth as victory drums pulse in unison beneath a sky still painted with ashes of sunset. Each thunderous beat binds tribal warriors who rise from tangled grass to dance around flickering pyres that smell of pine resin and sweat. Mainstream histories record that Mongol armies celebrated each conquest with synchronized drumming and horn blasts that fused separate clans into a single chorus of triumph. Artisans once carved small whistles from elk bones to add haunting overtones to these anthems, a curious practice noted only in remote Orkhon inscriptions. Historians are still debating how widespread the use of bone whistles really was. Some argue they formed a ritual core, while others claim they were rare curiosities used by only the Khan's personal drummers. You feel the ground vibrate beneath your feet and imagine the sound rising like a tide destined to sweep away all resistance. Lanterns glow in concentric circles around pyres where bards recite ballads of Khadan and Jelm in booming voices that fill the night air. Verses born from the secret history of the Mongols gain new life when sung under moonlight, each line a living testament to past feats of bravery and cunning. Popular accounts praise these performances as communal storytelling, yet obscure reports hint that some bards slipped secret missives into their lyrics to convey orders or concealed intelligence. Scholars continue to debate whether these ballads served primarily as morale boosters or functioned as a form of coded communication, arguing over surviving fragments found in desert graves that contain unexplained anomalies in rhyme and meter. You lean closer to catch every syllable, your skin prickling as words both ancient and cryptic weave through the camp. Vast shadows from burning logs stretch across leather tents where dancers draped in dyed yak hair robes leap and spin to intricate drum patterns. These folk dances, described in many sources as purely celebratory, incorporate shamanic trance steps meant to invoke Tengri's blessing on newly claimed lands. Ethnographers studying modern Mongol traditions identify echoes of these trance dances in remote village ceremonies, yet debate continues on whether Buddhist influences later transformed original shamanic rituals into the stylized performances witnessed by foreign envoys. You watch robes flare in the glow of firelight and sense an undercurrent of spiritual potency threading through each measured step. Flickering reflections in copper water bowls capture the outlines of passing merchants, who pause at the camp edge to witness the spectacle before resuming journeys along the Silk Road. Trade historians boast that the Pax Mongolica's enforced peace boosted caravan traffic by up to 60%, turning war camps into lively marketplaces overnight. Less documented is the custom of caravan guards using dance rhythms to coordinate camel teams, chanting in unison to set travel pace across sandy plains. Debate rages over whether this practice spread from military camps where songs served as unifying force or emerged independently in merchant guilds seeking efficient transport. You catch the steady chant and wonder if the same beat pulses in distant oases where traders tread. Drums falter then resume as whispers of dissent weave into the chorus of triumph. Rumors swirl that some tribal leaders felt shortchanged in the division of spoils, setting tinder to secret fires of resentment. Official chronicles dismiss these murmurs as isolated grumblings quelled by generous gifts of stallions and furs. Yet sources from Persian scribes describe clandestine assemblies where chieftains plotted to challenge Khan's favorites, a claim that modern historians dissect to determine whether it reflects real conspiracies or later attempts to tarnish Temujin's legacy. You hear low voices drift through the revelry and feel the electric tension of uncertain loyalties. Underneath the glow of torches, scouts slip between tents bearing names of villages marked for heavy tribute at dawn. Tribal emissaries, eager to maintain favor, offer songs of praise while passing secret notes wrapped in horsehair cords to rebel sympathizers. Experts debate whether these coded exchanges constituted formal espionage sanctioned by the Khan or opportunistic breaches of loyalty by ambitious courtiers. You glimpse the swift figures darting through shadows and sense the fragile line between celebration and subterfuge. Gathered around the last embers of fire, veterans share hushed stories of battles won and comrades lost. Tales of phantom trumpets sounding at midnight flourish among them, suggesting spirits of fallen warriors join in the victory chorus or haunt those deemed traitors. Folklorists note similar ghostly trumpet legends across ancient steppe cultures, yet they argue whether Mongol versions were indigenous or adopted from conquered peoples. You shiver at the whispered accounts and ponder whether drums and horns summon only the living or beckon unseen forces as well. Between dances and feasts, counselors record grievances on strips of birch bark destined for private appeal to the Khan's justice tent. Mainstream sources highlight the swift Yasa tribunals that crushed dissent with equal speed, yet some argue that secret petitions granted local leaders a safety valve to defuse any spark of rebellion. Evidence of these petitions appears in fragments discovered near former campsites, but academic debate endures over whether they represented genuine recourse or a symbolic gesture to pacify restive chiefs. You catch sight of scribes at work in the moonlight and reflect on justice carved by candlelight just beyond the festivities. Eventually the music slows to a hush as only distant war horns sound a final call to order and troops slip back into formation for dawn's campaign. Ballads fade into murmurs and drums give way to the soft whinny of horses preparing for the next advance. Trade caravans resume their winding paths as if nothing changed, bearing stories of victory and whispers of fear carried across vast plains. Historians today sift through dusty chronicles and oral legends to reconstruct the interplay of song and strategy, debating how much melody influenced morale or masked the strains of an empire built on swift strikes and whispered rumors. Shadows lengthen behind departing revelers as dawn's first glow returns to barren fields littered with scattered instruments and spent torches. The mingled silk curtains part silently as riders slip from the Khan's private tent, their boots muffled by thick felt mats laid for this very purpose. Mainstream sources note that Genghis Khan regularly sent envoys at midnight to negotiate ceasefires and tribute agreements, trusting the cover of darkness to shield delicate parleys from prying eyes. Lantern light glints off the steel of their curved sabers as you step between swaying yurts and join this clandestine procession. The cold air sharpens every breath, and you feel the weight of whispered secrets riding on each hoofbeat, knowing that a single misstep could unravel alliances months in the making. Moonlit plains stretch before you like a silver sea, shadows rippling across tall grass as your escort moves in perfect formation. A faint rustle hints at distant wolves, but trained scouts reassure you that these lands belong to the Khan's network of intelligence. An obscure practice among Mongol diplomats involved carrying small flasks of Kulan oil, scented with the essence of wild antelope, as silent signals of trust exchanged only between authorized emissaries. Historians are still debating whether that olfactory code ever played a decisive role in high-stakes negotiations, or if it remained an elaborate footnote in travelers' tales. Shadows swallow the narrow ford where a single courier pauses to adjust his satchel, revealing rolled parchments sealed with the tamga of the Borjigin clan. Each seal denotes rank and purpose, preventing counterfeit decrees that might spark needless bloodshed. Underneath the surface calm you sense the tension of tribal rivalries lurking beyond the bank. Rival Khans whose loyalty remains uncertain until ink dries on grain for tribute treaties. Whisper-soft commands ripple through your party as guides point toward the hidden meeting grove rumored to host midnight councils since Temujin's youth. Carried along a reed-lined canal, canoes paddle with silent strokes beneath dangling vines draped in phosphorescent moss. These waterways formed part of a secret route known only to trusted navigators who memorized every bend and eddy. Primary chronicles praised the Khan's use of waterborne diplomacy to outflank overland spies, yet modern scholars question how often envoys risked drowning or exposure in these marshlands. Field surveys have unearthed fragments of birchbark maps marking submerged waypoints, but debates persist over whether those relics guided early missions or served more as symbolic tokens of hidden passage. Beneath a canopy of ancient tamarisk trees, you reach a temporary pavilion lit by single oil-filled horns, their wavering light casting long, flickering shadows. Envoys from distant tribes stand in solemn rings, each bearing gifts of beaded furs, finely wrought silver bowls, and intricately carved horsehair bridles. A mainstream fact records that the Khan required ceremonial offerings before discussing trade rights or armed escorts, a ritual that underscored mutual respect. Yet some accounts claim that certain tribute items contained secret compartments for coded messages, a charge still vigorously debated at conferences on Central Asian espionage. Secret languages flow through the air as interpreters murmur translations in Kipchak, Uyghur, and Mongolian, their tongues entwined like braided reins. A lesser-known custom held that judges of these midnight councils dipped their fingertips in powdered lapis lazuli to bless documents with royal authority. While popular histories often gloss over such flamboyant flourishes, a handful of Persian envoys mention this vivid detail in passing. Modern pigment analysis on a surviving treaty fragment confirmed traces of lapis, but whether that gemstone ceremony was widespread or an eccentric invention of a single scribe remains contested by art historians. Lantern smoke drifts lazily upward as the Khan's envoy unfurls parchment bearing grain allotments and cattle levies due at the next lunar cycle. You lean forward, feeling the rough texture of the hide-tanned scroll beneath your fingertips. Observers note that these midnight decrees could be enacted immediately at first light, leveraging the element of surprise to collect dues before dissent could gather momentum. Yet some scholars argue that regional governors routinely delayed enforcement until daylight, citing local custom over imperial command, an interpretation that fuels lively debate in legal history circles. Hushed murmurs swirl around the pavilion's edge when a rival chieftain steps forward to propose a joint hunting campaign as pretext for discussing military alliances. Common chronicles describe these hunting honors as preludes to formal treaties, forging personal bonds between leaders. An obscure anecdote suggests that occasionally bone dice carved from wolf femurs were rolled to determine seating order at the banquet table, a ritual believed to reflect divine judgment. Historians are still debating whether such dice games held real influence on diplomatic outcomes or existed only as colorful lore preserved by oral tradition. Emissaries exchanged stern bows before accepting cups of fermented mare's milk laced with fragrant cumin and saffron, an unusual flavor that reportedly soothed tempers during tense negotiations. Chemical residue tests on pottery shards from Central Asian sites confirm the use of these spices in diplomatic feasts, though culinary experts debate the degree to which such exotic blends became standard at official gatherings. You sip cautiously, letting the warmth settle in your chest while scanning the faces of assembled leaders, each expression carefully unreadable in flickering light. Coded lantern positions outside the pavilion signal safe or perilous passages back to your camp. A simple arrangement of 3 lamps in a circuit conveys approval, while a single lamp left unlit warns of lurking patrols. Similar systems appear in sparse references from Chinese observers, yet debate continues over whether these signals were standardized by the Khan's couriers or improvised locally by resourceful scouts. You count the lamps twice before stepping into the cool night air, confident in your escort's judgment but mindful of the stakes. Travelers bound for distant courts pause at hidden cenotaphs where prayers are offered to fallen envoys whose journeys ended in betrayal or worse. You note offerings of wheat and dried meat laid at rock enclosures said to protect future travelers from treachery. Legendary tales speak of envoys swallowed by quicksand or ambushed by bandits masquerading as merchants, a grim reminder that diplomatic shadows often carried mortal risks. Modern geological surveys confirm pockets of boggy terrain near these shrines, lending credence to local warnings recorded only in scattered oral histories. Diplomacy flickers through cryptic symbols drawn on the pavilion's wooden supports. A tiger's claw, an eagle's feather, a coiled snake. Each emblem corresponds to code words known only to approved envoys and their handlers, allowing messages to be passed without uttering a single audible phrase. Some scholars believe this system represented an early form of concealment cipher, while others argue it was mere superstition. Fieldwork among steppe ethnographers discovered similar totems in tribal heraldry, but consensus remains elusive on their original diplomatic function. Hushed trumpet calls signal the arrival of a second tier of negotiators who will refine initial proposals before sunrise. Metal horns carved from mountain goat horns produce deep, resonant tones intended to carry over multiple miles of grassland. While mainstream narratives praise these horns as ornamental, acoustic engineers studying ancient wind instruments suggest their design offered surprisingly precise directional signals. Debate persists on whether tribal hornwrights collaborated formally with the Khan's engineers or whether each region developed its own variation independently. Alliances forged at midnight often hinged on the exchange of hostages carried away in shadowed litters, their safety ensuring each side's good faith until final terms were ratified. You watch as a reluctant prince wrapped in fur blankets is escorted toward a waiting stallion, his eyes reflecting both fear and honor. A little-known clause in some treaties allowed envoys to demand the return of hostages if word of bad faith emerged, a provision scholars still dispute regarding its practical enforcement across distant provinces. Binders of treaties engraved in runic-like script are sent ahead by mounted couriers racing to secure signatures from regional governors at dawn. Mainstream historians note that this rapid ratification process enabled the Khan to expand his influence faster than rival empires could respond. Yet critics argue that such speed sacrificed thorough deliberation, leading to vague clauses ripe for exploitation. Manuscript comparisons reveal discrepancies in wording among treaty copies, fueling ongoing debate on the balance between haste and clarity in Mongol diplomacy. Occasional trade envoys join these midnight councils, drawn by the promise of reduced tolls and exclusive mercantile privileges. You witness a silk merchant from Samarkand presenting rare brocades in exchange for safe passage, his voice measured and polite under the watchful gaze of Mongol guards. Economic historians cite these alliances as foundational to the Silk Road's prosperity, while revisionists argue that commercial interests often intertwined with political leverage, muddying the line between trade and tribute. Faint echoes of an overturned pot catch your attention as a hidden message written in citrus-based ink emerges under the flicker of a bent reed torch. This technique revealed unspoken conditions attached to the primary treaty, an advanced practice in secret writing whose origin experts debate between local innovation and learned knowledge from Middle Eastern scribes. You hold the parchment close, marveling at the ingenuity that transforms basic materials into covert communication devices. Boundary markers inscribed with treaty coordinates stand sentinel along the frontier. Silence envelopes the night air around the Khan's private yurt as you step lightly on felt mats laid to dampen your footsteps. A hush thicker than any winter fog settles over the camp, broken only by distant owl calls and the soft scrape of leather. Mainstream histories recount that Genghis Khan seldom slept more than a few hours each night, using the silent pre-dawn hours to weigh future campaigns and attend to realms stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea. An obscure detail found in a lone Persian traveler's journal describes the Khan drinking warmly spiced mare's milk mixed with ground ginger to stave off fatigue, a remedy historians still debate, arguing whether its energizing effect was based on genuine medicinal properties or merely a morale-boosting superstition. As you enter the glowing interior, every breath feels heavy with secrets kept and decisions yet to be made. Moonlight filters through the tent's central aperture, painting broad strokes of silver across the soft furs and low wooden chests piled with scrolls. Your eyes adjust to the dim glow, noting the elaborate yak hair tapestries that line the walls. These once simple nomadic shelters now boast decorative weavings acquired from subjugated artisans. Scholars are divided on whether these tapestries symbolized genuine cultural syncretism or served as trophies of conquered peoples, a debate reflecting larger questions about the Khan's approach to governance and assimilation. You brush fingertips over a panel depicting a stylized map of the steppe, recalling how archaeological digs near Karakoram uncovered similar wall hangings, used both as art and insulation. After the cheers of conquest and the rattle of dawn drums fade into distant memory, the Khan retreats to this private sanctum for solitude and introspection. You watch him settle onto layered furs before a low brazier, its embers casting flickering patterns across his weathered face. Primary sources describe his penchant for writing personal letters to family members during these hours, revealing a rare glimpse of tenderness beneath his public persona. An odd footnote in the secret history of the Mongols mentions that he sometimes inscribed hidden messages in invisible ink made from egg whites, a technique still contested by philologists who question whether those notes were diplomatic signals or intimate confidences kept from court watchers. Within moments, the Khan unfurls a fresh scroll upon a lacquered wooden table, ink pot already warm from the brazier's glow. The script flows in elegant linked characters borrowed from the Old Uyghur alphabet, a mainstream fact that underscores the Mongol Empire's pragmatic adoption of foreign writing systems to manage its vast territories. Obscure chronicles mention that he preferred gallnut ink mixed with crushed lapis lazuli powder for its deep blue hue, believing it lent authority to his words. A detail confirmed by pigment analysis on surviving decrees but still debated among art historians regarding its actual prevalence. Flickering shadows dance as the Khan dips his quill and begins to revise maps detailing supply routes for the next spring campaign. You lean forward, sensing the weight of every stroke on parchment preserved by camel fat coatings. Logistics formed the backbone of Mongol military genius, and modern studies agree that meticulous planning underpinned lightning advances across thousands of miles. Yet recent scholarship questions how much direct oversight he maintained versus delegating map preparation to trusted generals, a contentious topic that continues to color interpretations of his leadership style. Clouds of tobacco smoke curl from a small vessel at the tent's edge, where emissaries note the Khan's rare indulgence in smoking dried herbs rolled in leather strips. Some tribal elders frowned upon the habit, citing spiritual purity concerns, while others embraced it as a modern innovation from Western couriers. Debate among cultural historians centers on whether this practice influenced later Central Asian smoking customs or remained an isolated eccentricity of the Khan's own preferences. Tension hangs in the air as the Khan pauses to gaze through the tent opening at the horizon where night meets dawn. Ordinary folk risked their lives during morning raids long before enemy defenses raised alarms. This quiet contemplation acknowledges both the calm before the storm and the moral weight of his decisions. You sense a flicker of doubt cross his sharp features, recalling that historians still debate whether he considered restraint or mercy at these moments or simply felt the solitude of power itself. Candlelight glimmers off a curved dagger sheathed within the velvet folds at the Khan's side, a personal weapon used for ritual oath-taking in moments of grave promise. Obscure field reports mention that he sometimes used the dagger to carve notches into tent beams as markers of victories won and alliances forged, a practice whose symbolic significance remains disputed among anthropologists studying nomadic rituals. You feel the cold steel benumbing your fingertips as the Khan traces one finger along those unseen notches. Shadows retreat as the first pale streaks of dawn pierce the eastern sky, urging the Khan to rise and assume command before his sleeping armies. Mainstream biographies note that he personally inspected sentry posts at this hour to affirm loyalty and readiness, instilling confidence across every level of command. A whispered anecdote preserved by a court scribe claims he once left behind a carved wooden horse figurine at a new outpost as a mark of his approval, a story whose authenticity scholars still contest due to lack of corroborating evidence. Dawn's golden rays finally touch the tent's threshold, and the Khan stands, pulling his dark robes tight around him in a gesture both practical and ceremonial. Every decision born in these pre-dawn hours will shape the first light spills across endless grass as you stand atop a gently rounded hill surveying lands reshaped by Mongol rule. Mainstream histories agree that Genghis Khan's campaigns united a realm stretching from the Yellow Sea to Eastern Europe, forging the largest contiguous empire in history and setting the stage for an unprecedented interchange of goods, ideas, and peoples. Beneath your feet the grass waves in pale gold, each blade a silent witness to the rapid conquests that spread Mongol influence across continents. Later in the morning cool air carries the distant clang of smiths at new workshops where captured artisans now forge steel under Mongol patronage. An obscure fact recalled only in rare chitin inscriptions suggests that some of these smiths secretly incorporated local design motifs into armor destined for Mongol princes, a detail that scholars debate as evidence of cultural syncretism or subtle resistance. You watch wreathed forges glow in the valley below, sparks dancing like fireflies, ready to illuminate a new era of craftsmanship. Distant columns of smoke mark fresh settlements planted by returning warriors eager to claim grants of pasture and farmland. Records tell us that the Khan allocated lands to loyal generals through Yarli decrees, laying the groundwork for feudal structures unlike any seen before in nomadic societies. Yet some experts dispute whether these land grants represented permanent ownership or merely temporary stewardship, suggesting that peasants and herders often viewed Mongol edicts as impermanent mandates rather than lasting titles. Sunlight glints off caravanserai walls now bristling with activity, as traders from Italy, Persia, and China assemble under Mongol passports for safe passage. The resulting boom in commerce under the Pax Mongolica stands as a testament to imperial stability, though some economic historians argue that benefits accrued unevenly, favoring a cosmopolitan elite while small markets still struggled under heavy tolls. You pause by a bustling market gate to glimpse rare lapis lazuli beads and silk brocades that once seemed unimaginable in these steppes. Gentle breezes carry the scent of fresh hay and the briny perfume of caravans' provisions. You guide a team of newly trained scouts through caravans' trails, aware that logistics remain the lifeblood of this vast empire. Modern scholars praise the Mongols' sophisticated relay stations, the YAM network that delivered messages and supplies up to 200 miles per day. Yet debates continue over whether merchant caravans truly enjoyed equal access to these stations or paid premiums that limited their benefits compared with military couriers. Across a glimmering river you spot a newly erected tamga post where officials stamp travel passes and levy minimal tolls. These tokens bear the Khan's seal and guarantee safe conduct, an innovation that linked imperial authority with everyday commerce. Some critics maintain that local governors abused this system, collecting informal surcharges on spices and textiles beyond official rates, a gray area still under investigation by historians combing tax records and travelogues. Beyond the river lies a tapestry of fields and orchards planted by colonists dispatched under Mongol supervision to secure food supplies. This agrarian expansion surprises many who view the empire as purely nomadic. Archaeobotanical surveys confirm rapid introduction of new crops, chickpeas, rice, and grapes, while scholars debate whether these agricultural projects were centrally organized or arose spontaneously as enterprising settlers adapted to settled life. Dappled sunlight reveals a caravan of learned envoys carrying astronomical tables, medical treatises, and philosophical texts among their wares. Under Mongol patronage, scholars from Baghdad, Samarkand, and Chang'an converge in Karakoram to exchange ideas. Historians still dispute the extent of this intellectual fusion. Some champion it as the spark for later European Renaissance breakthroughs, while others caution that direct lines of influence remain elusive due to fragmentary evidence. Valleys beyond bloom with the red and gold of trading posts where Mongol soldiers stand guard alongside hired mercenaries from conquered realms. This blending of forces created the first truly multi-ethnic armies, a military revolution whose effectiveness modern martial analysts study with admiration and skepticism alike. Debate rages over how Mongol commanders managed linguistic and cultural differences among troops to maintain cohesion, a question that echoes in contemporary studies of coalition warfare. Late morning finds you at a newly consecrated shrine dedicated to the sky god Tingri, its stones stacked by craftsmen from the Khitan, Uyghur, and Turkic tribes. This syncretic place of worship reflects the empire's pragmatic religious tolerance. Yet some theologians argue that state support favored shamans over Buddhist or Islam traditions in certain regions, revealing an uneven approach to faith that fueled occasional unrest. Beside the shrine, a caravan sets off under elaborate escort to distant Kiev, bearing diplomatic gifts and letters sealed with the double tamga that signify Khan's joint authority. These missions cement alliances as far west as the Danube, illustrating the empire's diplomatic reach. Still, debate persists over whether such exchanges represented genuine partnerships or tactics to extract tribute from anxious rulers in fledgling European states. Shadows lengthen as you cross a high plateau where the wind whistles through flag poles bearing banners of crimson and amber. The vivid colors designate administrative districts, an early homage to heraldic systems that would shape later medieval Europe. Art historians analyze surviving pigments and seam patterns to determine local workshops' involvement. Yet they disagree on whether banner-making techniques spread from Mongol centers to vassal courts or developed in parallel across Eurasian cultures. Across a forested slope you glimpse a school where children from various tribes learn letters and arithmetic under Mongol tutors. Literacy spread rapidly under imperial edicts demanding record-keeping, but sinologists and Turkologists debate which script, Uyghur, Fagspa, or Chinese, ultimately proved most enduring in different provinces. You listen to scholars reciting lesson plans in multiple tongues, a living classroom that embodies the empire's multifaceted legacy. In a valley below, a graceful stone bridge arches over a turbulent creek, part of a network of infrastructure projects commissioned by the Khan's engineers. These constructions facilitated troop movements and trade, precursors to modern civil works. Engineers uncover evidence of advanced surveying instruments, though the origins of these tools, whether indigenous or borrowed from Chinese craftsmen, remain contested among technical historians. Approaching dusk you reach a hilltop funeral mound honoring soldiers lost in campaigns to the south. Ritual offerings of fermented mare's milk and bread rest beside carved stone idols. Community elders lead prayers in a blend of Tengriist and Buddhist rites, illustrating religious fusion. Some anthropologists question whether this syncretism eased transitions for conquered peoples or served primarily as political theater to solidify Mongol rule. As evening descends you return to the threshold of your yurt, reflecting on the dawn's promise of new horizons and the empire's unfolding future. The steppe stretches beyond, its horizons unbroken and filled with potential. Modern scholars continue to debate whether the Pax Mongolica's benefits outlasted the empire's fragmentation or whether its very scale sowed seeds of decline. In this moment you sense the balance between order and change that defines Genghis Khan's legacy. A world bound by swift justice, open commerce, and cultural exchange, yet shadowed by the costs of conquest and the fragility of unity. Each day's dawn brings fresh challenges and opportunities across the steppe, a testament to an empire whose promise and peril shaped the course of history for centuries to come. Light fades into gentle darkness as you settle beneath soft pelts, the day's triumphs and trials drifting from your thoughts like distant echoes. Breath slows, heartbeats soften, and the vast steppes outside your yurt become a lullaby of whispering grasses and far-off hooves. Embers in the hearth glow faintly before fading, leaving only the memory of warmth as you nestle into woven blankets rich with shared stories of courage, unity, and change. Thoughts of strategies, alliances, and campaigns dissolve into dreams where wind-carved valleys and golden dawns promise renewal. In this hushed moment the empire's boundaries seem endless yet safe, guided by whispered laws and silent bonds of loyalty. Close your eyes and feel the steppe's gentle pulse beneath you, drawing you into a realm where history and hope entwine in peaceful slumber. Rest now, under vast skies and countless stars, knowing that tomorrow's dawn will bring new journeys across these endless plains. Tread softly and dream well.